A new survey conducted by the Customs Division of Sars and the Eswatini Revenue Service has found that the average time between cargo arriving at customs control and then leaving customs control is 34 minutes for imports and almost 1.5 hours for exports. It's part of what's called a time release study on the flow of trade, how quickly goods move between Eswatini and South Africa at the Ngwenya border post last year. It shows, I suppose, what impact customs stops can have on business and on transportation. Edward Kieswetter is the Commissioner at Sars. Mr. Commissioner, good afternoon to you. Thank you for your time. Firstly, how did you do this survey? What were you actually trying to assess?
Thank you, Stephen. So before I answer the question, just to quickly remind ourselves that customs is not just an enforcement agency as people think when they see the customs officer in their uniform. Of course, that's an important part of our mandate. But an even more important part of our mandate is to facilitate the efficient and effective goods and travelers across our borders. And that's important, as you mentioned, because there is a huge cost implication for business and directly an economic implication as a multiplier for our economy. And so what we did was, part of the World Customs Organization is to set standards and then build capacity for the improvement of trade facilitation. And this particular study was to look, using Ngwenya border post as one of our busiest SACU posts, and to see how efficiently are we managing it, where are the bottlenecks, and how do we ease that to provide a more efficient and limited time without losing or throwing away the important mandate to enforce our laws and to manage the risk of either illicit or harmful substances coming into our country. And the WCO gives a standard methodology, very scientific and evidence-based. And this is the work that we did last year in October and the results which was announced yesterday.
Okay, so were you checking all of the goods, or did people have to tell you what was in their vehicles or in their trucks as you were moving them through? I mean, how were you able to know what was actually going through? Did you just look at the normal customs log? It sounds a bit more complicated than that.
It is a lot more complicated, but this is the time it takes whilst administering all of this. So what we use in South Africa is a pre-clearance approach, which says that before a cargo carrier or a clearance agency even gets to the port of entry, they would have submitted a declaration form that lists the details of the cargo. SARS would have done the risk profiling. It would have checked whether the client or the trader has any compliance risk, compliance history, and may or may not select a particular cargo for further inspection. But on the assumption that there's no risk detected, we really should passage that goods through it as fast as we can. And it doesn't disintermediate the need to pull someone aside for further investigations. But if you make the assumption that most of our traders are actually honest and want to just get their goods through the border efficiently and effectively, then that's the service we provide for them. It does not mean that if there is a risk that we won't add time, but that time would be profiled based on an actual risk and not necessarily on a random search. We may still do random searches in certain instances, but the primary risk profiling and selection methodology must be more evidence-based. And this methodology helps us to, in the absence of identifying a risk, give a smooth facilitation of that passage through the border post.
Okay, so why then is there such a big difference in the time between imports and exports? I mean, why does it seem that it's much quicker to bring something into South Africa than to export it into Eswatini, for it to go through customs one way but not the other?
So remember, it takes place at the border post and it's a coin of two sides. And so therefore, there will be a certain process on the Ngwenya side of the border post and a different process on our side of the border post. We deal with imports if it's coming from, and the other way is exports. So the reason for, there's different reasons. On our side, what we discovered, for example, is that 1 out of every 4 cargo carriers have not completed a pre-clearance form. What that means is only when they get to the border, they capture the declaration and they capture the manifest. That capturing process alone can add 42 minutes on average to the time, and therefore brings up a piling and a congestion at the port of entry. We found that to be the case on our side. We also found that up to 10 minutes can be added to the time just when a declaration is submitted online. It literally is processed and released for passage through the port of entry within under 5 to 7 seconds. But because of poor connectivity at the border post, it may take up to 5 minutes for that message to reach the exporter. So we found little aspects like that adds time, which is unnecessary. And then, of course, the reverse is true, because on the Eswatini side, they may have their own checks and balances before a good gets. And it's about the harmonization of that on both sides. In fact, what the work has demonstrated to us, if we attend to those areas of inefficiency, we improve the connectivity at the border post, and we harmonize the work across the two countries, we can reduce that time both ways to 10 minutes.
Okay, so there's clearly some scope for improvement from what you say. Do you think that the scope for improvement in this border post is the same for other border posts? At Bight Bridge, for example, with Zimbabwe, and obviously each border post sort of has its own story. Sometimes you do need to get the diplomats involved for various reasons. Do you think that what you've learned from this study probably applies, the improvements that can be made rather, probably applies to other border posts that you manage?
Absolutely. There's a couple of moving parts. The first is that when you get to a border post, there's a multi-agency engagement. So at the border post, for example, we have the Border Management Agency that looks at 3 aspects. They look at immigration, they look at port health, and they look at agriculture. All of that now consolidated under the BMA. SARS does the customs issue. If those, and then you have SAPS for security and protection, safety and security. If those agencies don't work together, and often that's a challenge on its own right, then you have unnecessary inefficiencies. Let me give you a very practical example that the study confirmed. So at the moment, the customs clearance happens place at point A, and the customs give the right of way for the truck to pass. But then the truck driver has to go and park the truck in an area demarcated, walk to the immigration office, join a queue where a bus of 70 passengers may just have arrived there, and then spend up to a half an hour in the queue just to get the immigration stamped. One of the recommendations is, why don't we combine those functions so that with one stop, without the driver getting out of their vehicle, they can get both the customs as well as the immigration formality dealt with. That in itself would take out up to 23 minutes. On average. So that's the one moving part. It's agencies on our side of the border working together. The second is inter-agency across the borders. Why we chose Eswatini is we have a good relationship at the level of myself and my counterpart. We have the willingness to do this and to work together. And so we started there because you need that friendly and cooperation between two countries to take place. Now, what would need to happen at every of the other Bight Bridge or Lebombo is to start a similar engagement with our counterparts, have a similar level of willingness to harmonize our standards and to streamline our processes. So theoretically, it can work, but in practice, it's going to be hard work. It's going to be political, diplomatic, and administrative engagements to get us to the point where we can harvest the insights that this current study has actually delivered for us.
Mr. Commissioner, I really appreciate the time. Thank you very much indeed. Edward Kieswetter is the Commissioner at SARS. Well, a lot more news to come. Busy news day. Do stay with us here on Newsfeed.